Welcome. A NASA telescope deep in space has recorded a remarkable image. It's an image of apparently hundreds of unidentified flying objects passing through the field of view. Our job, should we choose to accept it, is to identify what these unidentified flying objects are. But first we should understand what the image is and what it should look like normally. The image was taken by a coronagraph on board the SOHO spacecraft. SOHO was launched in 1995 and now orbits the Lagrange 1 point, about 1 million miles from the Earth, on the Earth-Sun line. This has the advantage that it can view the Sun all the time without being eclipsed by either the Earth or the Moon. This also has its disadvantages in that it's a long way away from the Earth, and the data flow is limited by the distance, due to the inverse square law. But what is a coronagraph? Well, it's a sort of artificial eclipse. It's a telescope that has an occulting disk in front of it. The occulting disk acts like the Moon does during a total eclipse of the Sun. It blocks out the bright surface of the Sun so we can see the faint outer layers. The telescope then images those outer layers, and so we can see the faint corona around the edge of the Sun. So this is what we should see. The white disk in the centre represents the size of the Sun. The dark disk around it is the size of the occulting disk, the artificial Moon if you like. The dark line in the bottom left is the bracket that holds up the occulting disk. And around that is the image itself, which shows stars and the bright features in the solar corona. If we string a whole bunch of these images together, we can make a movie. This movie shows a whole series of huge explosions coming off of the Sun called coronal mass ejections, and the bright object going across the field of view is Venus. I must admit I never get tired of looking at movies like this. The coronal mass ejections are just so spectacular. And they of course cause geomagnetic storms if they hit the Earth, so they're of importance to our daily lives. So what can we deduce from just looking at the images? First of all, there are a lot of those streaks. They're not all following the same path. They are bright. They are obviously between SOHO and the Sun, and their sizes in some cases are resolved. We can see the length of the streaks are all very similar, so that probably means they're all travelling at very much the same sort of speed. It's probably very close to the spacecraft too, because we can actually see a resolved disk in many cases, but none of the other instruments see this effect. Either the other coronagraph has bright streaks, or the EUV instrument, which would see large objects silhouetted against the bright Sun. So these things must be pretty close to the spacecraft, in fact pretty close to this one instrument, which also implies that they are small. This leads us to the conclusion that this is probably some sort of debris, probably originating from the SOHO spacecraft itself. But is there any independent evidence that this is the case? First, this has happened several times before, and if you go to the Alaska website, they have several examples of the same sort of thing. But what is the likely culprit? I mentioned that SOHO was launched in 1995. That means the spacecraft is getting pretty long in the tooth. Most of the instruments were designed for a 3 to 5 year lifetime, and it's lasted 3 times longer than that. One of the most vulnerable parts of a spacecraft, as we found from the Solar Maximum mission, are the thermal blankets. This is bright reflective material often coated on a plastic substrate like Kapton. These plastics become very fragile when exposed to a great deal of sunlight, which of course SOHO is. Minor impacts from things like meteors will break the Kapton, and little bits will flake off. And this is what we think we're seeing here. Supporting evidence comes in the fact that several of the temperature sensors have shown increases over a period of time, particularly the door on the CDS instrument, which is very near to the coronagraph. This probably means that the thermal blanket covering the door has flaked away. Hence our unidentified flying objects have now become identified flying objects. So this is not a case of aliens invading from the planet Nibiru, but yet another example of humans littering space. That's it for this evening. Keep safe. Bye for now.